Brianna Smith,
Here.
Shade Fashakun,
Here.
Nikosi Nelson,
Here.
Trish Bodie,
Here.
Paul Gautier, Gloria Gonzalez Telequia, Laura Marquez.
Here. It is 6:19 p.m. and with the quorum of the board present, I call this meeting of the Leander ISD Board of Trustees to order. Next, Dr. Chris Clark will lead us in the pledges.
If you would please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. We'll now have a moment of silence. Thank you. You may be seated.
The board will now hear citizens' comments from those who have signed up to speak. In accordance with the district's policy BED local, public comments at a special board meeting are limited to items on the posted agenda. Before I invite the first speaker to the podium, we'll watch a short introductory video.
Hello, my name is Mira, and I'm an 8th grader at Cedar Park Middle School. The district and the Board of Trustees are the local government body responsible for serving the educational needs of all school children, like me and my friends here in Leander Independent School District. Their mission is to cultivate each individual student while creating a safe and supportive environment. The board is now taking up the citizen comment agenda item. This is the dedicated time during this meeting to hear from the whole community, and the entire LISD family is listening. The district believes that the Leander family thrives when we ensure a welcoming, safe, and caring environment. To our speakers, before you speak, we hope you have read the guidelines specified in the board operating procedures in the BED local. The board wants to hear from everyone. Please be mindful of your conduct and the example you are choosing to set while presenting complex information. Remember that school children of any age may participate in board meetings, either by watching them online or you might even see some of us in the audience. Still remember that there are other ways you can communicate with the board. You can send them an email or just tell them you want to chat sometime. When the board president calls your number, remember, watch the timer and focus on your remarks to the time allotted. We know it can be hard, but please conclude your comments when you hear the chime.
Speaker number 1.
Good evening. I contacted your data department about tracking future Fabian data, and they cannot make the decision to track that data point without instruction from you, the board, and/or staff. The data point I want to know is the number of Fabian students who leave Leander ISD after you close their school. Please track this critical data. I'm sending a written request to governance. With the current student allotment value, Fabian students represent about $2.5 million per year in student allotment money, based on an estimate of 400 Fabian students. When the student allotment increases, this amount will be about $4 million per year, assuming a future student allotment increase to $10,000 per student, which is in keeping with COLA and inflation. My concern is that many Fabian students may leave Leander ISD when you close their school. If 25% of Fabian students leave Leander ISD after you close their school, then the district stands to lose more than $600,000 per year at the current student allotment and $1 million per year in an increased student allotment. $1 million per year lost in student allotment money. Closing Fabian is a huge decision, and it will be important to know how your decision impacts Leander ISD in the future going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker 1. Speaker number 2.
Good evening. It's been a while since I've been able to speak. Thank you all for your service. Happy 2026. I've said this before, but I think it's important to reiterate. I don't think any of the folks up here want to close or repurpose any schools. The issue, though, is our legislature is not properly paying our teachers and is not properly funding public schools. And until we get that to happen, these folks and other folks like them all over the state are going to have to make some tough decisions. I think I saw that Fort Worth ISD is having to close or repurpose as many as 14 schools. It's crazy, but we've got to get the legislature to do more. I also am wearing my wonderful Pride stuff, and I want to make sure that our students in our schools that are trans or queer or somewhere on that spectrum know that things get better. Stay in school. You're going to make a great living. You're going to have a wonderful life. Don't let the bullying, don't let the things going on today get you down. Stay in school. It's really important. I do want to stress, I know you're doing budget stuff tonight. We need to increase SPED funding. We need to pay our teachers as best as possible. But again, I know you've got a tough job, and I thank you all for doing it.
Thank you, Speaker 2. That concludes our citizens' comments for tonight. Board members, we're going to move to consent agenda. Do I have any motions related to consent agenda items?
I move the board approve the minutes as presented. Is that the one? Oh. I move the consent agenda items be approved as presented. Second.
Oh, yeah, no worries. There she is. All right, I have a motion from Sade, a second from Laura. All in favor? 5 ayes, motion passes. All right, board members, we are going to get to our big agenda item for tonight, and it is the 2026-2027 budget workshop. Whenever y'all are ready, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Madam President, board members, Dr. Clark. As President said, we're here to talk about the 26-27 budget, looking at some budget levers, reviewing some key actions that we've taken, and facilitate some discussion around program goals and high-impact budget considerations. We have 3 kind of key topics that we really want the board to focus on, that we want to have kind of an idea of how comfortable you are with like adopting the 25-26 budget assumptions, because they need to be adopted on January 22nd. Oh, sorry. Oh, here, got it. I'm thinking somebody's clicking that for me. I don't know why. Sorry. And then also we want to revisit the District of Innovation status and talk about potential benefits of that. And then we want to get into a discussion of significant financial impacts that require some prioritization and see where the board stands on those. So to kick things off, we want to start and take a minute to talk about where we are, what we've done, and what we have left to do. And I think Sarah Grissom wanted to say a few words here, so I'm going to let her take over.
Okay, so here on this slide, you see our overall budget timeline, and where we stand in that, which is the budget development here in January. And if you go to the next slide, you see that this actually is embedded in a larger timeline that we just wanted to highlight. There's a lot on that timeline, but what we wanted to highlight for you all is that after last year, we took some time to really reflect and look at how do we do this better? How do we not only align processes and make sure that the decisions that are made are informing the budget, but then also making sure we've planned for intentionally the feedback loops from various stakeholders. So there was a lot of work that was done trying to prepare for this year. And so if you go to the next slide, you see just pulling out some of those key actions that have happened related to the budget. And you can see we've noted here the specific feedback loops that have occurred that so far up to this point that is informing our conversation here tonight.
Okay, and so next, we're going to start with updating you on the 26-27 budget. We talked about back in December, we talked about assumptions, but that we would come back in January and update you with pre-preliminary CPTD values and some other information. So we're gonna kind of dig into that. This first slide is restating assumptions. These assumptions are the same assumptions that you saw at the December meeting, but I wanted to make sure that they stay contained with the projections that we're providing you, because these will be the assumptions that we ask you to approve unless we discuss that tonight and we have those changed. I'm not gonna go through these one by one since we have talked about them, but I'm gonna point out some key assumptions for you, specifically enrollment. We're talking about using projected enrollment of 41,841. Our enrollment obviously is very key to revenue. The other big ticket item in here is your budget parameter, which we have set at 1.5%. That is lower than it's been in years past, but we feel like it's appropriate at this time during the budget, kind of the budget situation that we're in. And two other really key items are there's no pay increase included in this projection. There is no increase to healthcare costs in this, or employer contributions in this projection either. What we do have in there is $1 million for the pay study. That's simply an estimate. We don't know that it will be that high. We also have costs for opening the early childhood center and for continuing to outfit the police department. So those are key assumptions. All of the assumptions are on here, but those are key things to remember kind of as we move through this. So with that said, I'm sorry this slide is a little bit small. So hopefully you have it on your computer and you can read it. This is a side-by-side. So up there on the left-hand side, that is projected enrollment. Beside that, on the right-hand side, is using reduced enrollment so that we can see the difference of the outcome. And within this, we've updated revenues based on CPTD values. And like we said, those are pre-preliminary. So they're, and which is weird. We will get preliminary at the end of this month, early February, and those can change. They typically don't, but it can, and if it changes, it will cause the revenue to fluctuate. But in these two scenarios, the only difference in the revenue is including CPTD, and we have also adjusted free and reduced numbers. We did that based off of what we're seeing right now. Because of the numbers that we're seeing, it was a lower number than what we projected this year in 25-26. So we went ahead and adjusted for that in these numbers just to see where we're at. One, we went up, or do we go up or down in state revenue? Sorry, that on here. Sorry. Huh? No, well, yeah, but I'm talking about the CPTD caused us, we went down in state, but we went up in local revenue. It really ended up being pretty flat. So what we brought to you back in December, that revenue hasn't really changed that much based on projected. Obviously, if you look at reduced growth, it lowers the revenue significantly. Next, I want to talk about, well, I already talked about that. I want to talk about expenditures. So with expenditures, we kept them exactly the same as what you saw in December. We didn't build in anything that we're talking about. We didn't make any other reductions. The only difference that you'll see in here is recapture, and that's because that's driven by the CPTD values and your number of students and their weights, and so it automatically fluctuates, so you're going to see that number be different than what you saw in December. Other than that, that stays exactly the same. So the results, again, with projected, we're still staying about that $12.7 million over the 1.5% parameter. That's what we talked about in December, and it continues to be the same now, even with these updates. Now, if we use reduced growth, then you see that increase, that deficit increase about $6 million. So, which means we would need to identify an additional $6 million. So I want to dig in, this next slide's going to dig in a little bit more into enrollment and why we're recommending the projected, and kind of talk about that with you for just a few minutes. So right here, I kind of did a history, obviously, and you can see in 25-26, obviously our enrollment came in lower than we had projected, and also lower than it was in 24-25, by about 1.54%. And then the projected enrollment is staying pretty flat. It's about 100, a little over 100 kids less than what we have this year. And then if you used reduced, it's like over 1,100 students lower than what we have this year. I want to talk to you about a couple of the reasons that we want to use projected. One is based on PASS's discussions. They said that they identified the reasons why The projections didn't come in this year. The charter school that opened up that wasn't anticipated, it wasn't supposed to open until next year. They also kind of straightened or righted the ship and did a new baseline. So based off of that, as well as the fact that we do budget conservatively, the majority of the students that we reduced were at elementary. Well, at staffing at elementary, we do not add teachers until we know the students are coming. So, and they call and they verify, so we don't add staff. So that's a very conservative way to budget. We were like 300 and something students under for elementary this year. So your majority's there. The other thing is, as far as operating allocations, from the budget office, when we do operating allocations for campuses, we budget at 90%. We don't do 100% off of projections. We wait until PEIMS enrollment and we shore it up. We don't ever want to take money from campuses, so we're trying to make sure we're always giving them money midway through the year so that they can finish the year out. So if they get more students or they reach their enrollment projection, that's fine. And if they're less, typically they're not harmed. They just don't get any additional funds. So with that, this is kind of our first stopping point because I wanted to stop in phases as we kind of go through those areas that we really want board feedback. Is we need to know the comfort level of the board members with these assumptions, understanding, one, that these are just assumptions. They change as we go through the process. This is a baseline. Again, I pointed out the key assumptions up here in here so that you understand the enrollment is really key, your pay increases are key, your increase to health insurance. Those things may be really important to you. So if we need to make changes, we would need to know that now. If you want that in the baseline. It doesn't mean we can't do it later, but if it's no-go or have to, we need to have those discussions so that we can be prepared from the budget perspective to do something different and to pivot. So that's kind of our first stopping point. I'm gonna let you ask questions or have discussion.
I was just going to clarify, so right at this time, Gina, we really want to focus feedback and questions around this particular, the assumptions and the parameter, et cetera. And if we need to, we can come back to this if you want to hear, if board members want to hear the rest of the presentation. But we can certainly get that feedback now, so when we are ready to come next time, we have the input we need.
All right, board members, who wants to start it off?
So I think for me, I'm stuck on the pay increase piece. Our budget situation is what it is. We all know where we are with that. But when I look at districts around us and if they are giving pay increases, we didn't give a pay increase last year, especially for folks who weren't increased with the state money. We have some amazing staff, and I want to keep them. I'm worried about what will happen if we don't. But it's also, I guess it's hard to definitively say that without knowing the rest of the pieces, right? So I think that's just kind of where I am. I'd like to know, I know you said we can make changes later, but it would help for me to know cost benefit of saying now, like let's include pay increases versus moving forward with these assumptions. And then if we said, once we saw what the landscape would look like, once we know about some of the other funding revenue pieces, if we said, okay, now let's add it. So I guess that's what I want to know is what that means either way.
If the board decides that it is critical that we add a pay increase now, we can do that. It just means we will need to identify additional reductions, unless we do get revenue somewhere else down the road. But we would need to plan that now and not waiting on that. So it kind of gets into some priorities that the board might have.
And we're coming back to this particular topic later in the presentation, if I remember correctly.
We do have pay increases. We're talking about significant monetary impacts later on in the presentation, so we can certainly come back to this if we want to do that. That's at the board's pleasure.
I think it's okay to get this feedback now. I'm just wondering, just to inform the board, that we're gonna come back to this and what those pay increases might look like. There's some options that they requested and we've brought. So if we hear we want a pay increase, then we might actually determine what that looks like and what the implications are, so.
Absolutely.
I think for me, I mean, it's a couple things. We're working with barely anything that the state has given us. So, I mean, we're kind of, in a rock and a hard place right now. But I keep thinking about our staff and everything they're having to deal with and their morale in general. And it costs so much money to train a new teacher. And then not only that, to instill the culture of our district into that new teacher, it's gonna take 2 to 3 years. And so for me, I understand the situation we're in and the hard decisions we're making, but my top priority right now is to retain the staff that we have right now. And I feel like we need to do what we can. I know money's not gonna appear out of air, but I also understand there's gonna be harder decisions to make. But if those hard decisions come at a price of retaining our staff, then I'm willing to make those. So I would really like to see, I don't know, I know what that 2% is gonna cost us. I mean, could we look at a longevity bonus? Because I know staff members missed that this December. This was a huge hit for them not to get this. That is something this board has done almost every year. And for them not to get that this year, I mean, they understood, but that's gotta hurt, y'all. Some teachers are living paycheck to paycheck right now. And so that's one of my big priorities right there. The other thing is, and I know Trish will hit on this later, but it's the health insurance contribution. I know Pete, you and I have talked about it before. What can we do differently to make it more efficient for our district? I know we started this one organization, I'm not gonna say its name, but something's gotta change here. And if we're gonna, give our staff that 1 or 2% raise, but then healthcare is gonna rise, it's not gonna make a difference at all. And so I would like to see us try something we haven't done before in this district. I don't know what that is, Pete. I don't know. I have no idea. But those are my two priorities right there.
And we do have some health insurance information coming up as well, so y'all are on board.
I almost wonder, just to kind of manage the conversation a little bit, that we get into that particular, that's a good conversation just to have. I think it fits in those slides that are coming up, if everybody's okay with that. Just so we don't get redundant.
Sure,
or,
we can move forward. Are y'all good with that?
I'm not saying we need to move forward. I
sorry.
think we have other board members that may want to talk.
Sorry.
I'm just trying to kind of.
Yeah, I would probably agree, because that was my first, one with the pay increase and increase in health insurance. I think Anna's right on in terms of there's a hidden cost of attrition, both financial and cultural, and ultimately may impact student learning. I would like to see the most aggressive budgeting we can see. So I would probably go with the low growth model. I would want to see what a budget looks like with the low growth or reduced growth model, just to be as aggressive as we possibly can with the reductions that we might have to consider.
Trish, do you have anything to say, Trish?
I'll wait.
All right, let's go ahead and move on. Sade would like to wait, right?
Oh, can I just ask a question? Because I want to understand that part too. And I think I heard some discussion around implications for making decisions around teachers and staffing. Part of the implication of going with the low growth versus, so did you catch that part too? Because I would benefit from just maybe explaining that one more time.
So you're talking about the why we're recommending projected versus reduced?
Yes, so I can make sure I understand.
We don't want to negatively impact the district going so conservative that then we make reductions that we didn't need to make. And because we budget conservatively, and like I mentioned at elementary, we don't add a staff member until they're, like this year, for instance, there were additional staff that are they're savings in the budget. They were vacant, but they've not been used because we didn't need them. So they're sitting there and they will go towards savings because we had lower enrollment. So there are things like that that happen all year. There's other expenses that won't happen because we had low enrollment, so we will see savings in that area. So if you go solo, like it's 1,100 students lower, then we're going to make $6 million more dollars. So 18 million in reductions is what we would need to be shooting for. And I think that is a little bit aggressive. Now, if we wanted to talk about doing something else, then we can. And I know, like I said last time, Pete and I have had this conversation multiple times about do we budget projected at 99% or something like that, but not doing so aggressive that you've done things or cut programs that you didn't have to, and then you've done it and you can't undo it so easily. So that's what I was pointing out.
That was helpful, thank you. I wanted to make sure I understood what you were saying in terms of that piece, because I think that's a good question about,
So, okay, and you're thinking we should.
I'm just thinking as an option, right? Not taking
Right.
action on it, but thinking
Okay.
if we had to, so we understand what our levers are, and we don't have to come back to the table in the event that we get some data that we might actually land at the lower number. So it's almost just having that option available to us, knowing if we had to cut another 6 million, where would that be, and having those levers as an option. And so that's why I was
Okay.
thinking in that
I
direction.
think you answered the question I was getting ready to ask. What I heard you say is that, what would that look like? Not, that's what we need to do. And so I think that's a little bit different, and it shows, but we could even show maybe a couple of scenarios, what would 99% look like? Because I think another key point that we didn't, and maybe I missed it, is the change in what projected and low, that terminology and what that means from PASA is the key point too.
Correct. I mean, they spend a lot of time and energy. I know that they're not always exactly on point, but history shows they're pretty close. I mean, COVID years have been more difficult and challenging, but their history proves that they do a good job. And so they're talking about having righted the ship and having made adjustments to their baseline to answer for what happened this year. And I thought they were reasonable in the answers. And so, again, I don't want to do something harmful to the district is kind of what my direction, and waiting and see what happens. So did you want to add anything, Jeremy?
I know the board, we
Sorry.
get daily updates on enrollment, and I've been looking because I saw we gained some over the break. And so, but this year we're down 558 students. And if we had went with a reduced enrollment, then we would have found ourselves in this pickle of a mess that you're describing and trying to, get what we needed to get, so.
I'll comment one thing on the PASA. One thing that impacted this year was the charter school. So we don't quite have the same charter school potential impact that we had this year, which 2 charter schools opened and actually opened in a different way. They opened with like all grade levels. They usually phase it in. So those impacts alone can really, really impact our overall enrollment, and they did. And so we don't have that same level of variability in this upcoming school year. And so, yes, they do recalibrate each year. And so what happens is you benefit from previous year, and that's exactly what they've been able to do this year. So less variability, I think, this year.
So just to kind of summarize here, I'm hearing 1.5% as a parameter we're good with. We want to have some low growth. What would that look like? Options, not necessarily move that way. But then pay increase is important, and addressing health insurance is important, which we're going to get into more details as we get to that next phase. So we'll come back to that, just so we kind of can clarify as we move.
Okay. So now we're going to move into discussion of program objectives and resource optimization. One of the first things I wanted to point out to the board, because I know this is important as well as to the community, so the strategic lever and impact analysis tool that's been discussed before, that is going to be utilized in this process, so we are taking that into consideration, the chiefs and administration. And the work's just started, so it's not done. We're still doing outreach is going to happen. We've done a lot of internal discussions and loops of feedback, but it's not complete yet for all of it. So just know that that's coming. Administration plans on coming back in March to discuss kind of if we've made final decisions and showing you kind of those outcomes and those objectives and what that looks like. And here is just making sure that you remember and reminding you and the community what those commitments and definitions are: the student experience, staff experience, stewardship, and sustainability. So they will use these levers when moving through the process. Just want you to keep that in mind as we kind of go through some of these next topics, which are kind of program-based, and decisions that are, or discussions that are being had around each of these. So I'm definitely not the program person, so we may be calling a friend if I need to. So I'm going to go through some of these things. A lot of the information I have in here, I'm going to read some notes because I did get feedback from those program leaders. This is not my expertise, but definitely going to go through this. And then if you have questions or you need more information, we'll call those individuals up and they can specifically address them.
Can I just kind of frame this a little bit before we move for the board to make sure there's clarity that we're given information on these particular programs because through the processes that we talked about that Sarah outlined at the onset of the presentation, these are the things that came to the front. Of course, we don't want to make any cuts anywhere, just to be clear, but things where there was potential efficiencies, savings, things that we could do. That's why we're talking about these programs specifically, and you'll see that emerge as we go through.
No, thank you. So first, looking kind of at CTE, we all, we've talked about this before. This is an area of growth. We can support both student outcomes and financial gain. CTE receives weights between 0.1 and 0.47, depending on the class. There is an expectation, or we definitely get the funding whenever it's a certified teacher. When it's an uncertified teacher, there are other qualifiers that you can use, one being District of Innovation or DOI. So we want to kind of bring that back to the table because that is an area where if we have that designation, then we can get weighted funding for those programs. If the decision's made we maybe shouldn't move in that direction, then we're looking at teaching permits and temporary classroom assignment permits as an alternative, but it's important for the board to understand those methods are much more time-consuming and labor-intensive. We have to come back each time and get board approval and have those discussions, so it makes it a little bit lengthier process in order to get the funding turned on or approved. So again, we'll talk about the DOI here in just a little bit. I'm going to move into gifted and talented. So just a request, whichever one we want to call it. It is a state mandated program. That's not a program that's going to go away. But the program identifies students and provides differentiated instruction. But we are conducting a program review to just strengthen the instructional delivery and ensure consistency across campuses. So at the same time, we're also monitoring staffing to ensure we remain aligned with our established staffing guidelines and use the resources efficiently. So that is being reviewed, the program is in detail, and looking at whether or not we're being efficient in that and identifying and being aligned across campuses.
I'll make a comment on that one too, just because there's been a little bit of questioning around this, that we are not eliminating this program. As Gina said, it is state mandated. We are looking at efficiencies around this, but we're looking at efficiencies around everything. So just for any community members that may be watching, or just if board members, as you get questions, we are not eliminating the GT program.
Correct. Similar to what we did this year with some of the staffing guidelines, we weren't necessarily following them, is making sure that we are, so that we are being efficient in our processes, but still delivering good instruction. Okay, I'm going to move into dual language and bilingual education programs. Obviously, we have to have some of that as well. We don't have to have dual language, but we do have to have, bilingual programs. So we participate in a strong, participation at the elementary level is really strong. It drops off at the middle school level, and I'm specifically talking about dual language. So we see a reduced participation. So we are reevaluating our middle school model. We're looking at student needs, program effectiveness, and long-term sustainability, again, at that middle school level. TEA requires a bilingual program, but not a dual language model. We do receive some additional funding for students in DL, or in dual language, but it's not significant, so we need to analyze that and see what that cost would be. But that is an area that we are looking at. Also, we looked at pre-K 3 and 4. We've talked about this in the past quite a bit and how the program plays a critical role in long-term student success, these 3 and 4-year-old programs. Jeremy presented data last time showing that the majority of students who begin in our pre-K stay in our district. So that means that we're also getting funding, and the funding's staying here. Right now, at this point in the game, doesn't mean anything's off the table, but that we're not looking at doing anything with pre-K 3. However, we could look at adjusting some of the ratios. TEA max is 22-1. Ours at pre-K 4 is 20. So we are considering moving into the 22-1 model, and it could be that we look at pre-K 3 as well. And then I'm going to hand this over to Pete. He's going to talk about some compliance stuff, the easy stuff.
The easy stuff, yeah. I just want to briefly take a few moments just here to talk about, on the finance side, there are some compliance areas, a little different than the accountability side, but on the finance side. So I want you to understand what this is, and as we have these conversations about Career Tech, GT, AKA Quest, bilingual, I wanted to show you, in most of these programs, we are spending way more than we are financially required. So from a financial perspective, there's no ding. There may be a ding, or there may be something different on the accountability or the instruction side, but as far as this is strictly from a financial perspective on what we spend. So Career and Tech, we'll just use it, they all follow the same model, but so your first column, Career and Technology, we get just under $21.1 million is the allotment. We have to spend 55% of that allotment to be in compliance. We have to spend $11.6 million. So 55%, why do you ask that, right? Why 55? It used to be 52, used to be somewhere 100. If you go back to the late 2000s, 2007, 8, 9, we had target revenue. It got to the point where as the basic allotment went up, all these allotments are tied to the basic allotment. They were getting so big, there was no regular ed money. I mean, it was getting really tight. And so they said, well, hey, instead of changing the formula, we'll just say you guys spend 55% of it. So what they did is they actually got that number back down to what it was prior to target revenue. So it just kind of stayed the same. So they've always done it in a weird way, but that's why there's the 55% on for some, and some have 100, the 36, 37, 38. Those are the new ones with House Bill 3, and those are all at 100%, which is early ed, dyslexia, and the CCMR, which we don't have shown. So if you look at Career and Tech, you have to spend 11.6. We spend just under 14 million. So the purpose of what I wanted to show you is A, is the finance piece that we're in compliance. But B, the other thing I wanted to show is most of the programs, you can run a very quality program at the 55%, give or take. You don't want to hit it down to the penny, but I mean, we're 120% on Career and Tech, and we're solid. Gifted and talented, we get just over $800,000. We spend $4.3 million because every elementary has a GT teacher. Some have more than one. There's some aides. There's some other programs. There's some software. There's other costs, but strictly from a financial perspective, we spend a whole lot more than we get from the state. Generally, what gifted and talented used to be was they're only going to fund you at 5% of your refined ADA. So if you have, like us, 42,000 students, and you're running about 39,000 refined ADA, you're only going to get funded for GT on 5% of 39,000, regardless of how many students you have identified as gifted and talented and receiving services. They're going to max out at 5. So back in the day, when I first got into when I first learned school finance, the expectation was most districts are going to have about 10% of their student populations are going to be identified as GT. The state pays you 5%. You're expected to match 5% locally. I'm going back to 2001, okay? But that's kind of the general, that was always the general rule back, again, 20-some years ago. So typically, they didn't want, because everybody could just say, hey, everybody's GT, we're going to increase our WADA, and there's a lot of things they can do. So they wanted to not, I had a board member actually say that once. So why don't we just make everybody GT and give more WADA? I'm like, time out. I had to go to the 5% rule. So there's a cap on it. Bilingual, this one's going to look very dramatically different next year. That does not come out good at all. But so bilingual, allotment's 3.5. You got to spend just under 2. We spend right over 2. So we've been 106%. However, this new House Bill 2 that just passed, prior to that, the only thing you could code to bilingual was the stipend. You know, they get a $5,000 stipend, $3,000 or $7,000. You could not code this $50,000, $60,000 salary. It was only the stipend. So you can see just the stipends, we're meeting the 55%. Now, next year, well, actually, we're working on it this year. We're getting the coding changed. But if you're a bilingual teacher and you're getting a stipend, we're going to change the salary to be 25 too. So that $2 million is going to look like it's going to go 4, 5, 6, 7 million. It's not new positions, but it's just, you know, if you're receiving a stipend, it makes sense to go ahead and, I mean, we could keep it as a stipend just to say that we're meeting the financial requirement, but really it makes more sense to code it all. Early education is very unique. The new ones are unique. The early ed, dyslexia, and then like CCMR as well. Basically, those are, you just find any teacher you have that meets the requirement and you make sure you code it, so you say that you spend that money. So early ed is anybody third grade or under, math and science, or math and reading, sorry. So we typically take a percent of that teacher, 20%, and we just code all elementary teachers or core teachers to that way, and that's where that 4.6 comes from. Dyslexia, very similar. Special education, it is well documented. The state has not funded special education to the extent that it should have. My whole career. They're $2 billion short. That was about a 4, 5, 6-year-old study. It hasn't gotten any better. But we received 50, we got to spend 27, and we spent just under 71. And it's not that we spend 71 to have a Taj Mahal program. We spend 71 because that's what's in the IEPs and in the yards, and we're meeting the legal requirements. There are some expectations of change coming forward, but it's $250 million total statewide. So it's not, even our little piece as a district, it's not going to be any amount that's going to really significantly close that difference between the 71 and the 27. So just, you know, as we have these conversations now and in the future, as we talked about, you know, Quest, we talked about bilingual, we talked about career and tech early ed, the whole intent of this slide was just to let you know that we are aware there are financial compliance requirements. We are well going to ensure that we continue to meet those with any of the changes that are discussed now or in the future.
And I add one thing to that, like to me, the bilingual, why we would code to pick 25, it's to show the same thing like with special education and school safety is we're spending a lot of money, but are we really getting the funding to support those programs? So that's why I think we need to make the shift to make the coding what it's allowable now. Just not having teachers coded was really strange to me. But yeah, as Pete said, this is just a layer. Like as they're doing analysis, the instructions doing that, we're also looking to make sure we're staying in compliance. So say that the bilingual hadn't changed, we would be talking a lot about whether or not we could do anything in that area because we would need to meet compliance in future years. So we definitely want to make sure we're staying compliant. And that kind of brings us to our next kind of stopping point, or our pause. And this is just wanting feedback on whether or not you would like us to revisit the District of Innovation status that we've kind of talked about and the benefit that we could get in regard to the CTE. Go ahead.
I would like to hear from Dustin about the uncertified CTE teachers. I've heard from one principal, one perspective. I want to hear from what that looks like. Because, you know, I think about Leander High School, right? We have the HVAC system. Like, are we going to have a teacher become a certified HVAC instructor? So I'm just can you lay that out for us, Dustin? What does this look like? Because, you know, when parents hear uncertified teacher, they're, oh my goodness, what is happening? But in this case, it's not really like that. So can you kind of explain that for us?
No, and to address the question you just asked for HVAC, if I'm an HVAC technician, I'm going to make far more money in the industry than I will being a teacher. So to leave the industry and come into the classroom, I don't also want to go and spend $5,000 on a certification program when I could just go back to the industry and make, you know, financially more money that way. The long-term impact that those people make in the classroom, though, is I can't put a dollar amount on that. CTE is the only area through District Innovation now that actually allows uncertified teachers to come in with a substitute of industry experience or credentials from that entity that certified them to go into that field. So it's not like they're coming in without knowledge. As a district, we also give them classroom management, pedagogy. There's training that we put them through to make sure that they're meeting the requirements in the classroom. But as far as the industry knowledge, you're not going to find somebody graduating from college with an education degree that can teach HVAC. You're just not going to. So we've gone back and forth a couple of times. I've reached out to TEA, I reached out to the state CT director to ask some questions, and I was actually talking with Jamie this afternoon about this. There are very few areas in CTE right now where we have teachers that don't have a certification that's gone through HR as far as an emergency permit, short-term, temporary. So HR does a great job of making sure that our teachers meet the requirement, and there's a checklist of 17 different things that HR goes through before we put a person into the classroom so that they're uncertified.
So I guess my question for you, Rachel, is if we were, decide to allow funding for, for uncertified CTE teachers, how would the hiring process be, hiring a CTE? Like, what barriers are we removing? Are we going to be able to get staff in the classroom? What does that process look like?
So right now, we're really good at finding a creative way using what TEA allows us for certification opportunities. Like Dustin said, whether it's an emergency permit certification waiver, which you guys have approved the past couple of years. The only one that we haven't tried, which was listed earlier, is the school district teaching permit that we could utilize. It does require board approval for each individual teacher and then TEA approval, and there's a small fee. So at the end of the day, when you hear all of that, and I'm coming to you every year for certification waivers and all of that, the District of Innovation overall, well, we're being creative in getting those certifications where we can. It takes a lot of that work and barrier away and still having the same high expectations for our teachers that they have certain expertise to qualify for those teaching positions, and we're providing them that classroom management that they need as well as mentoring.
So I just want to clarify that this DOI does not require that, or actually takes their experience and then substitutes that gives them some credit towards teaching or certification, but they don't have to go get certified eventually.
Correct. So the district will set, if you guys were to tell us to move forward and look at this some more, we would determine how we wanted to write the District of Innovation as far as certification goes, and then we would bring it back to you, and then it would be submitted to TEA for approval. And so we kind of set our own parameters in that. And if you look at the ones just statewide, they are all over the place. I looked at this about a year ago with some of our competitors, and literally all over the place. And so you guys could give us some parameters, or here are non-negotiables, and we could go from there. Or we could bring you something and say, this is what we think would work best for the district. So there's a lot of flexibility in the DOI, and TEA is open to that local decision.
And do we know how many teachers fall into this right now, that we're not getting the full benefit of the revenue?
7?
It's more, right, I can tell you a dollar amount. I think right now we're losing about $1 million because we've got teachers that don't have the right certification area.
All right, good.
So that's a number that we've been going back and forth in the last couple of weeks, trying to nail down and figure out how many teachers it is. A lot of these changes took place at the end of last year when certain positions were surplused, and then we still had kids that needed to go into some of those classes, and so we had to move a teacher that didn't meet that exact requirement or that exact certification. We moved teachers into those positions, but we had to turn the funding off. So they're certified to teach through an emergency permit or whatever process we went through, but we were not eligible for the funding on some of those. So we're leaving money on the table right now with some of those teachers that are sitting in those classrooms.
Or is this why maybe we actually ended up closing up some CTE programs because of the teachers and the cost and how much money we're losing?
We had some that students vote with their feet. So when students don't sign up for certain programs, the enrollment decreases. Some of the programs are just not sustainable anymore in terms of the number of students that we saw in the pipeline of those courses. And our CTE program just went through a full evaluation, looking at all the programs, looking at all the teachers, all the spaces. We're looking at ways right now to expand and add seats to every single classroom that we've got. I was on a Zoom with Jamie earlier today, meeting with technology, trying to figure out how we can put extra drops in classrooms to put more seats, more computers, get more students in these CTE classes because we know they're valuable. We just don't have enough space for some of the programs, but some of the ones that did sunset this past year, it was based on student enrollment or interest in the programs.
Yeah, I would like to see y'all come back with something that is aligned with our mission and vision of the district, because this is a way for us to generate revenue. But then I start thinking, right, college is really expensive now. We know students are looking at other avenues, and this is a whole program that we have in our district that students can start out of high school. And where are we putting, we need to remove those barriers to make y'all's job a lot easier and get those individuals in the classroom. So yeah, I would like to see that. That's my take.
And just to clarify this for anybody who's watching, I want to make sure I understand it correctly, and that is that this is not saying like a free-for-all with uncertified teachers. This is specific to CTE because we want to be able to have industry professionals sharing their knowledge with students.
Yes, it is specific to CTE courses, and it doesn't change the standards that we in Leander ISD or in HR have for who is and isn't qualified for teaching.
Thank you.
Have a question.
Go ahead, Trish.
Yeah. One of the things I'm curious about is as we're talking about kind of the budget implications of doing this DOI, we're not really hitting on that another piece of student outcomes. And I really want to see that as well. So not just that, we could offer more, but that this will really impact X number of students if we're able to do this. This will really impact the credentials they have. Like I need that hardcore data that goes with it, not just budget alone. Seeing both of those together makes such a difference. And that's just such a challenge with us doing this budget conversation right now is like, even on the last slide, you showed we were spending, 500% over in GTE. And so the question would be, wow, then we must be getting like 500% over what we expected in student outcomes, but it doesn't work that way. So as we move forward, I really want to make sure as we're talking about budget, we're also tying into what are the expectations that is going to happen with student outcomes. How are we going to help students with this? And does this money not just help us operate more efficiently, but how does it directly impact student outcomes?
Okay. Are y'all ready to move on? Okay, just making sure.
I just kind of want to restate here,
sure.
just so we're clear, we're gonna bring back some options on pursuing this non-certified portion of DOI. I know you've already begun. Did you want to say something about this? You've already started looking at.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that we can amend our current plan at any time, but it does have to go back through our district-wide committee. So just know that that's going to be a process that we'll have to do. So we can definitely take all of those steps that are outlined, but I just wanted to highlight it will have to go back through DWIC before it comes back before the board.
I think we're good. Yeah, moving on.
So I think now we're going to move into those significant monetary impacts that we kind of need to look at prioritizing as we move through the process. I bring back this slide, and most of you, if not all of you, have seen this before, especially the slide on the left. This is included in every budget adoption, just that we show the percent of staff versus contracted services, versus utilities, things of that nature. Typically, you see 88% on there, but we've actually carved out healthcare. So that's usually included or incorporated into payroll, but it's 6% on its own. So we carved that little piece out just because we are going to be talking about that here in a few minutes. So I wanted you to see the costs associated, their percent of our budget it is. And so that leaves our payroll at 83%. So if you added the other piece back in, you'd be back up there. Then the information that's on the right is from 24-25. That's because it's been submitted to TEA and it's source data. We did just go through our fall submission, but it's still being checked and reviewed. And so I wanted to go back to true data that's kind of source that talks about, how many teachers versus professional versus auxiliary aides, things of that nature, to see, because in the next slide, we're going to kind of look at some comparison. And we've shown some of this before, but I always think it's a good reminder. It compares to the district average as well as other similar districts. Areas that are higher than the state average in most districts are teachers and educational aides, which just shows the district's committed to kind of those student-facing positions. We also looked at comparison with teachers and aides. We combined that at the bottom. You'll see that at the very bottom, just because we wanted to show it together. Some districts may have more aides than teachers, and some have more teachers than aides, so we put them together just to see where we fell again, compared to state as well as other similar districts, and we continue to kind of be on the higher end in that area, which is a good thing. And then as far as the areas that are lower, it's almost all of the other. Campus admin is much lower than the state and surrounding districts. It's one of the lower ones, as well as central administration. This next slide is just really for informational purposes. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I think people don't really know what are in the categories, and so we wanted to list those. These are not all encompassing. I need to make sure I say that. We couldn't fit everything, every single position. This is just to give you an idea of what are contained in those categories. So especially your professional support versus your central administration, those are very gray, and there can be lots of confusion about what's contained in one and the other. So we wanted to put that in here for community members and for the board, just to have as a resource. And so, again, the information from 24-25 is a little bit old. It's still, because we know that we made reductions for 25-26. And as we look ahead, like, we can anticipate and assume that there's going to be some changes in some of those areas. I wanted to point out kind of a few key assumptions I think we can keep in mind. The percentage of teachers, it was higher, and we expect it to decline some because we did reduce that, but we do think it's going, in almost certainty, at least preliminarily, what I've seen is still above the state average and in line with peer districts, is what we're seeing. I think maybe the lower area is going to be your campus administration, because we did make some adjustments there and we were already low. So we can probably expect to see that go even lower. And then central administration will probably stay flat and will probably stay about the same. But again, it's already well below the state average as well as peer districts. And then we expect a small decline maybe in the professional support, but I think it's still going to stay in line with the state and with peer districts. So. And then the fun stuff, the stuff I know we all want to get to. I know it's important. So we've looked at the 1% for all, the 1 and 2% for all staff, right? So we have the 3.4 is the 1% to everybody. The 6.8 is 2% for everyone. We did look at what would the increase of 1% and 2% be if you looked only at those that are not eligible for the TRA. So if we looked at that, it's 1.4 and 2.8. I know that there was a request to also exclude those who received TASB increases, but there's not really an equitable way to do that, because the TASB increase was based off of certain criteria, and that was based on title and years of experience, period. So some people might have gotten $5 a year. I mean, that was their increase, 5. Now others may have gotten thousands, but where do you draw that line, and how do we extrapolate that and make it equitable? It wasn't about the quality of work or anything like that. It was strictly, it was very, and if you want to speak to it more, you can, but it's pretty, so I was not able to do that. That will be very difficult. So what's out of here is just those that are not eligible for TRA.
And just as a reminder, if anybody doesn't know, the TRA was either $2,500 or $5,000 for experienced teachers. So your 0 and first-year teachers didn't get any increase, and then anyone that wasn't a teacher.
Okay, and then I'm going to hand this over to Pete. He's going to talk about the health insurance and a few other things. I'm going to dig in.
All right, so if you kind of imagine like the solar system, right? The sun is the center. That's the general fund. We have all these planets going around us. You have all these different funds, right? You have health insurance fund. We have, we have your bond funds. You have your title funds, your federal funds, all these different funds. Well, if any of these funds are out of whack, or you're spending more than you get in that fund, they all have to go back and take something from the general fund. So the general fund is sitting here in the middle. Any issue you have on any of these other funds outlying, they come back and they affect the general fund. So we all know where shape the general fund is in right now. It's not exactly plush with cash, okay? So we're already in a deficit. So then we have other funds, and so other areas that are taking from that, and so we got to figure out, and that's part of our conversation tonight, is have that discussion. What is, back to the slide on, I think the slide 15, I don't spend a lot of time on student experience, but I will spend a lot of time on staff experience, stewardship, and sustainability. So that is kind of the big piece. And so as we set these priorities, what can we sustain? What do we have that we can do? So health insurance is like on the slide, a couple slides before, it's 5% of our budget. I mean, that's what we spend on the health insurance. And so if you look at, so just clarify a couple things, the operating revenues, that is strictly the employee contribution and the employer contribution. There's a little bit of interest. And then occasionally we'll have some claims that go above our max stop loss. And so then our reimbursements are in there. And then our expenses that's our claims. That's the claims that we receive. So if, just looking at 2021, we had just under 27.5 million in revenues, and we had almost 29 million in expenditures, a loss of about 1.5 million. Now at that time, we have about somewhere between 75 and 80% of the employees in our district participate in the health insurance plan. So that means that any given year, 10 to 15% do not participate. So what we did at that time, in that era, was we said, hey, if you don't participate, we're still going to budget whatever we pay, $410. I think it was about $410 back then, maybe $360 a month. Now it's up to $510. We would take that money and we would transfer it over, and so that's called the opt-outs. The amount transferred in, opt-outs. Those are the people that opted out, didn't participate in health insurance, but we still paid their contribution, the employer contribution in to that fund. So that was to the tune of just under 5.8 million. And so for that year, we had, end of the year, after the transfer, about 4.2 million, 4.195 million more than the expenditures. So 21, 22 comes around, 22, 23. So 22, 23, if you remember, we still did the opt-out. We had about $15 million, if I remember, as we closed that fiscal year. And I came to the board in June. I said, hey, let's roll 10 to fund balance. Let's transfer 3 to the health insurance fund, and then we put 2 in major maintenance. And so that was the year we lost just under 2.1 million. We transferred in 5.7, and then we transferred in another 3. So that got us, we added just under 6.7 million. So our fund balance is 12.7. We dropped down. It's going back up. Same thing in 23, 24. Our claims increased almost 25%. Our revenues went up, 3 or 4 million. We transferred in 4.239 million. So that year we 3 million reduction in fund balance. And so we finished 24-25 with almost 7.5 million more expenditures and revenue. We did transfer in 1.5. Now, the plan was as these transfers go down, the monthly contribution was going up $50 a month. So when that goes up, that's about $2.5 million per year to the district cost. So this year, we ended a little over 6 million taken out of fund balance. I had to come to you last month and take 2 million out of fund balance because we pretty much depleted that $7 million. Now, we may have some stuff coming in, but we're probably not going to be enough to ever pay back that 2 million. I would hope so, but I'm not going to hold my breath. And so as we go forward, and like I said, this is not the discussion we're going to delve deep into tonight. This isn't the time or the place, but this is our launching pad, is what we're starting. We have to, one of the things we talked about, you want to have good salaries. We all want to have good competitive salaries. Part of having a good competitive salary is part of a compensation plan is health insurance. So we want to have a good health plan. And how can we have a good health plan? And where is the right balance between what the employer pays and what employees pay? What are some of the things we do? We've got some things in the works, but we're just wrapping up 12 months. And so we haven't really seen a full effect of what some of those potentially cost savings could be. So in this year's budget, we did not increase the employer contribution. It remained at $510 per month. So going forward, as we have these conversations in the next couple, 2, 3, 4, 5 months, part of it for the 26, 27, part of it for 26, 20, future years and beyond. I almost hit you, didn't I? We need to have conversations, and we've got, our consultants are coming in the next few months. They're working on some things. Rachel has been in contact, so we're working up some different scenarios and kind of say, hey, what are some things that we can do? Here's, plan A, B, and C, different scenarios, and we'll have those conversations. But You know, do we adjust just the benefits of the plan? Do we make our plan not as rich, but so the cost is less? It works, but it may not be the way we want to go. Do we increase the employer contribution? Ideally, it'd be nice, but I don't know if we're in that position where we can do that. Do we increase the employee contribution? And to what point do we feel comfortable on the employee side? How much can the employee bear without being too much for them to bear, right? I mean, that's the balance piece. We talked, one of the board members mentioned having a sliding scale option. I don't know of any districts that have a sliding scale option. I do know of another district that does have, they pay like $25 more per month if their salary is $40,000 or less, or whatever the number is. They do it that way. And then the ultimate question going forward is, are we able to stay self-funded? Is that in the best interest? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know, but there's a lot of conversations we need to have before we get to where we have that conversation. And so those detailed options will be shared at a later time. They're being worked on. We're trying to look at this thing, not as a whole, but how are we able to sustain this? And if we have to take from the general fund, how much can the general fund provide? And so it's a tough situation. It's not an easy conversation. Health insurance never is. Spent many of my years in health insurance, and it is different to everybody based on their needs for health insurance. And so it can, some people are barely hanging on, and any adjustment to health insurance is very detrimental to them, and some people haven't been to the doctor in 3 years, I mean, it's just 6 of one. I mean, you got the whole, very broad view of what health insurance is to people. So we'll bring that forward. One of the things we did this year is real high-level property casualty insurance. I know you guys, this is the slide you've been waiting for all night, was property casualty insurance. It's the ultimate here. But what we noticed was our premiums were going up and up and up each year. And so this past year, I know we talked about it earlier when we did this, when we adopted this in the summer, accepted this in the summer, but look at our district. Our district is very large, very big. I have 49 campuses. They're not all on one street. They're not all in one section of town. They are spread throughout 200 miles, 200 square miles plus. So when we looked at that, it really made sense for us to do something different, and that is to get health insurance and share in some of that risk, because it would take a catastrophic event for multiple of our buildings to have significant damage. I'm not talking about the winter storm in 21 where we had some pipes break here and there, but I'm talking significant damage. So we were able to take upon some of that risk on the district, but we were able to reduce our premium just on the property casualty. I think we ended up reducing it about $1 million, but the net effect was about $600,000 net savings. And so I just wanted to bring that, because we are looking at everything that we can look at and try to find, can we still be within our risk tolerance and have the coverage we need, but can we reduce the cost? So that was $600,000 we didn't have to reduce in staff or anywhere else in the district for the 25-26. And then the other piece, as we mentioned earlier, like the health insurance fund, we have other funds. We have federal funds. We have Title I. I have Special Ed at 224. There was a whole bunch of titles, but Title I is the biggest one. And so one of the things we're looking at or we're hearing rumors of next year is about approximately 15% decrease in title funding. So if that were to come into play, and we won't really know a whole lot on that one until April or May, probably more on the May, but I haven't heard a lot lately on the rumor side, so that's a good sign. But or sometimes it's not a good sign, depending on the strategy being used against you. But so if we have to have those conversations, if we do get reduction in title and in the federal special education funding, are those positions so important that we have to put them over to the general fund and we have to keep those? Or can we not keep those positions? Or is there a middle ground in there? And how are we using our title funds? Are we using them the most efficient and effective? Those are the questions we're going to have going forward. And I would say we probably need to have that conversation regardless of if we have a 15% decrease or not. I mean, everything needs to be on the table every year for this, where we're at right now. So any of these decisions that are made that we can't pay out of federal, but we got to keep, then that means it goes over to the general fund. And so that's more pressure on the general fund. So if we already have a deficit, that adds to that deficit, it makes it harder to meet the requirements of the health insurance, salaries. And so all of these things, they all affect one another. And so they all intertwined. And so if we can look at everything individually, but also understand they connect collectively, and we have these conversations, we'll be able to come up with the best piece or the best plan based on the feedback we get from the board on what's most important? Pay increases, health insurance, retaining staff, federally funded, keeping the federally funded positions. I know we want to do it all, and I don't think none of these are mutually exclusive from one another. It's not like, oh, we're going to pay everybody well and no health insurance, you're on your own, go get it we're not going that route. But we have to find a balance. We may want to give a 3% pay raise, maybe only be able to do 1 and keep some health insurance and keep some of the positions and to retain staff. But we can't do everything we want to do for all 4 or 5, 6 categories that we have. So we have to figure out which one of the categories is the most important, which is second and third, and which ones work together. Because compensation, health insurance and pay they're very similar. How do you retain staff? For some of it, that is compensation. For some individuals, that's more the fun things and the culture and the jobs that they have, and they're not overburdened. They're not super stressed. So all these things come into play. So that's kind of where we're at. What we wanted to talk with the board tonight was, kind of get some direction. We're going to bring you more information. I mean, we're not asking for a decision tonight, obviously, but we got more information coming on the health insurance side. Is there any more information that you feel that we need to bring that would help in future discussions and decisions about how we figure out what our main pillars are of how we develop this 25-26 budget and any budget in the future years?
I think for me, it's not so much a priority. Well, I'm not going to say that. I'm curious about the federally funded positions because we hear a lot right now that they're trying to push, particularly special education, back to the states. And so in my mind, I'm like trying to figure out how are we as a school district going to prepare for that? So say next year we wake up and it's like, oh, guess what? All your federally funded positions for special education's gone. So I think for me, I'm not saying that I want to keep all those positions. I want to know what that entails and what that structure looks like, because in my mind, I'd like to see us, let's be honest, it's not going to be here probably in 5 years. And so I want to make sure that we are being proactive about this and not waiting until the federal government does pull those, because we know, as a matter of fact, that could happen in any moment. And so I want to see what that structure looks like, what's impacted as far as student experience, staff experience. I mean, is that going to be a ton of staff members we're going to have to let go? I just need to know more about it. That's all. And that could be a conversation we have, not at a board meeting, just whatever we do. But I'd like to get some more information just to wrap my head around that. And then for me, it's gonna, I told you to go find something for health insurance. I don't know what that whole that thing is. Y'all can do that.
Yeah. We, like he said, our providers are actively looking at options for us. The actuaries are comparing what we have now and what we're offering now to several different options. And they're going to bring me kind of a draft in the next few weeks, and then we'll get with our Benefits Advisory Council. One of the things that I am adding this year is a HR Advisory Council, so I can get members of every campus and every district department in a room to talk about some of this stuff and get some feedback from their perspective, and also let them take that information back to their friends, so that we can be sure that whatever very difficult decisions we have to make, we have that perspective at the table as well.
That was actually, first I just want to say that these slides around board input and guidance are super helpful. So thank y'all for that. I really appreciate it. Very much along the lines of what you're thinking about as a parent in a family with medical complexity, I think about satisfaction with the health plan as is. And, if the majority of your community is healthy, then, they may not. But I do want to make sure we don't lose sight of the staff who maybe have medical complexity within their family, and making sure that we're not forgetting about not leaving them out to dry.
Yes.
But again, that piece around what do folks like about this plan? What do they not? I know a lot of times in dealing with insurance, the company ultimately hears about what's working and what's not. So just thinking about how that informs our decision-making as well.
Absolutely.
I have a question. The health insurance, will that include the HSA contribution or any of that? Is that all health insurance?
No, HSA is a separate.
Okay.
That was a separate decision outside of the healthcare.
Okay.
And so if that were something that we would bring back to the table, it would be separate.
I just had to ask.
I appreciate administration's recommendations. I think just as we move forward, what I want to understand is really, if we're going to do something different than what y'all are saying, I want to make sure I understand all the threads that pulls. I really want to be able to lean into administration's expertise on the recommendations and the parameters. And so I'm hesitant to say, oh, we need to change only healthcare because we still want to talk about pay raises. Well, if we say only pay raises and then we don't talk about healthcare, I just feel like it puts board in the weeds. So I really want to keep just leaning into administration to say, you know what we want to do for staff. We want staff retention. And so I still want to see y'all's recommendations coming forward of really like how you think we can best balance this moving forward, knowing that, just as Anna said, we're going to continue to have our funds kind of depleted if federal government keeps their processes going or the state keeps going their way. We need to preserve that fund balance as much as possible. So I just want to be careful and make sure I understand before board goes into the weeds and overrides a recommendation from administration that we really understand clearly why you're recommending what you're recommending. And I think that goes back to Nikosi's question, which is when you come back to us, if we went further in the reductions, not necessarily we want to see what all those pieces are. We don't want you to run the scenarios, but we just want to understand the recommendations you're making. I think I've got that right. But Nikosi, if I misstated it, feel free to say something else.
Board members, do you have any other input?
Yeah,
Okay,
I think the health insurance is really fascinating. I'd love to know like the drivers of the expense, and like what programmatic things we're currently doing. In my mind, it's like if we keep our staff healthier, then we reduce the expense. And so I know we, have Frontier and we're doing health and wellness programming. And so would love to hear the programming we're doing to bring down the expense as well.
That's part of what the actuaries are looking at for us, and some of it is hard to quantify. For example, there are certain services that we offer to those that are insured with us as some of those preventative measures, but they also cost more. And so then how do we know if that preventative measure prevented something or if it's just an additional cost? So they're working on that as well.
Raven, are you able to tell how well they're being used? Because I do look at the brochure and there's a lot that is being offered, but see what's being used.
Yes. Now, keep in mind, when we're talking about the health insurance, it truly is just the health insurance. When we're talking about dental and pet insurance and all the other supplementals, those are at no cost to the district. The employee takes those costs on. So those are just things that we find for them and offer for them to take advantage of.
all right, board members, any other input? I love that we offer pet insurance.
Sorry, y'all. Okay, so we're going to move into some of the other budget consideration and fiscal levers. These are just things that we're putting everything out there. We're having conversations about everything. Obviously, a revenue generator, an option is the VADER, the voter approval tax ratification election. We have 3 copper pennies left that equates to about $6.8 million. If this is something that the board decides to entertain, then there are some definitive dates we have to pay attention to, so it's just important that we keep those in mind as we move through the process. I've listed a lot of those up here. July 3rd is kind of the first key date. We have to make sure that we select an auditor to do an efficiency audit. So I want to keep those things in mind in case the board wants to have more discussion about that we just keep it in mind. So August 17th is the deadline to order the VADER. We have to adopt the budget and the tax rate. The tax rate, adopting that tax rate triggers the VADER. And then the other steps come in. We complete the efficiency audit. It has to be posted by October 2, and then you have the election on November 3. So other things that we've talked about with the board and mentioned here before, but I want to go back through. We've talked about the sale of land. That is still, is still on the table as well, but it is a one-time infusion of funds. It is not going to fix the problem. That's not a long-term solution at all. So we would still need to continue looking what we're going to do in future years if we go in that direction. There was discussion about lease of land. Jeremy looked into that some, and we've talked, and just land itself doesn't really bring in, it doesn't have a big financial return, but also you would need to develop an agreement specifying prohibited uses of the land to make sure that you didn't have things going on in the land around a school or around another school campus or something like that. And then, of course, we're still waiting for the hold harmless funding to come in, and we expect that decision in February or March. We don't think it'll be more than $3 million, if any. We received a letter from TEA. I'm going to let Pete kind of go into the detail of that, but we're still looking at definitely February or March before we get an answer.
Yeah, we received a letter, I believe it was from Representative Busey, that had gotten a letter from the commissioner. One of his staffers had gotten a letter they were inquiring about it. And I appreciate Representative Busey following up and keeping this at the top of his radar. But basically, I'm going to paraphrase, but I don't think I'm paraphrasing too much here. Basically, it just said, while it's possible we think that maybe there was a hold harmless, we think you've got all the money you need to meet the requirements of House Bill 2. However, we'll wait till final values come out, and they'll run the numbers in early February. And if there is a loss, we will have a conversation about any hold harmless piece there. So we just, like I said, we just are, like I said, Gina had mentioned earlier, we just got our CPT values. We just got, there's a template came out the other day. There were some issues with it. Becky in our office is one of the people that actually test the template when they sent it out because she's so good. And so he sent her another one today because there were some errors in it, and so it was overstating our revenue, and so she's looking at it, and they're rectifying that, and so unfortunately, as of this afternoon, there was no change in it, but they're still working on that, but so we will continue to watch that, but we were kind of hoping once we had final values or the numbers we plug in that we could actually look at and see if there was in fact. And the template's changed. It doesn't even have that line on it anymore where it tells you. So we have to go back Becky has to go back and manually figure it out. But once we know that, and we're going to sit down and see if we can, justify that. And we'll work with Mo Casey as well. They've been our representative and with us and the other 9 districts on this matter. So basically, in a nutshell, is we're looking at it as gravy. I mean, if we get something, it's gravy, and we're not holding our breath for it. But we do think, and I feel quite confident that we were required to spend, and House Bill 2 was a whole lot more than the funding that we got. But we'll have an exact figure of that once we get our final values and really crunch the numbers.
And other good news, sorry, I don't, sorry. So back to the CTE allotment, again, obviously we're keeping this at the forefront and looking at potential additional programs and how we might be able to bring in that funding and whether or not it's good for students. So we continue to look at that. Open enrollment is underway. There's a dedicated open enrollment page, and there's marketing and outreach that's going on. We're going to monitor that. We've not included anything at this point. We will wait and see what kind of interest we see and consider doing something later in the spring. Average daily attendance, we're seeing it track. We're at 94.125 is what we budgeted this year, and we're somewhat in line with that. But there is no reason for us to increase that at this time. Hopefully, if the initiatives continue, then we can do that in the future. It may just be a little bit more time before we see the benefit of that. So we'll watch it and keep watching it. The special education allotment, we talked about that. We know that there's going to be some modifications and adjustment in 26-27. We don't know the methodology. We don't know what that's going to look like. We're thinking around $1 million. We're being, I think, pretty conservative in that. Hopefully it's a lot more. I don't know that it will be a lot more. Facility rentals, we increased facility rental costs this year, and we will monitor that through the year to see if we could increase it even more for 26-27, but that won't happen again until the end of the spring. I mean, we really need to see what happens the rest of the year. We do know that we're having some increased use of softball fields and things of that nature, but we didn't have the pack this year, so I'm not sure that we're gonna see a big increase this year, but it may be that we can increase for next year, so, yes, ma'am.
So we are doing rentals of the softball fields? Okay.
Yes. And then also we're looking at advertising, you know, opportunities on buses, campus sites. I don't think that is a deficit closer either, but you know, every little bit at this point, if it's significant, we would bring that back to you. We're still kind of having conversations and trying to find a company or organization that can give us even some estimates on that. So we'll bring that back to you as we get it. We've talked about TIA. We did have a meeting. Rachel set something up with Region 13, and they came in and talked to us about that. We do need to know that that's a 2-year to implement, so that isn't something that could happen next year. I mean, we could start on it, but it's not going to be impactful next year. And it doesn't really close the gap. It just assists teachers in getting additional funding, which is every little bit helps, and so I think it's great to explore that option, but it isn't going to close the deficit for us. But it is something that we need to look at in interest of our staff. And we're looking at the additional days school year. We met about that a couple of weeks ago. So we have all kinds of committees being formed. We had another committee for that, and they're doing research. And the big clincher with that is that you have to adopt an instructional days calendar of 175 days. That has to be the board adopted calendar. So that is something, or a hurdle that would need to be discussed or brought forward to the board. And again, as we do research, we can have additional conversations. And then there's lots of exploration of other innovative programs. Another committee is analyzing other options like Virtual Learning Academy, the use of voucher dollars, and other non-traditional programs. So there's a committee that's been formed that is looking into all of these different things and having those conversations. So as we get more information and better understanding, now again, that may not be 26, 27, it may be that it's 20, but we need to be future thinking. So I think these are great things to talk about. It just may not be next year, but we still need to have the conversations and be moving forward in those areas. We've also talked about the instructional materials and technology allotment. We do have the option to receive some additional funding based off this last legislative session. This has not come through the general fund, so this is not FSP funding. It is outside of that, but it could offset costs in the general fund. So I think it would be more of a cost avoidance and other areas where maybe the instructional materials allotment needs to pick something else up, they could. So they're looking at that, seeing what opportunities we have to make purchases through the IMTA. That's being explored as well.
Let me just add one little thing there, because I'm a little passionate about this particular one. So we have to be careful how we use it, but we also have to be smart about how we use it. I think, I wouldn't say we haven't been, but we could be more smarter. I don't know if that's the right way to say that.
Yes.
That's kind of an oxymoron, right? So as we are adopting new resources, I'm going to give you a really simple example that probably doesn't even exist. If we adopt a HQIM that is comprehensive, that includes a digital platform that provides some intervention and type of thing. Right now, we have separate Tier 1 instructional resources, and then we buy supplemental additional resources. If we buy more cost effectively, especially off of that state board approved list, we are accessing dollars that we can only access that way. Now, that came to us in kind of a negative way, to be real honest. I sat down right there in those seats at Concordia and talked about how the state took money away and then gave us extra money, so to speak. There are some pros and cons to it. There are some pros to it as well. There are some decent instructional materials that are being adopted by the state that are not Bluebonnet. Now, even Bluebonnet has negative connotation, and there are some things that we don't like about it. But the math side, there are some decent things with Bluebonnet. I'm not saying that's what we're doing. I'm just saying we can consider different things to capture dollars in a different way. So if we can adopt something that comes comprehensively, then we could save $300,000 that we're using out of IMTA to buy an online digital platform, that then that $300,000 is freed up to capture something else that we can, iPads, technology, things like that. So it's just being smart about the way we use it. And I do feel like our new assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction is much smarter than the previous one. And so she's really moving in the right direction with her team to be strategic around how we're doing those things. It does take time, but I think it's important for the board to know that we're pursuing those things. So when we come back with some potential SBOE approved adoptions, those are not bluebonnet, and it is helping us financially down the road.
Thank you. So now we're kind of moving into, these are all of the identified reductions right now. So at central office, there's 1.4 million plus. We're vetting everything that's been submitted. So again, until we get that vetted, I don't want to bring back a number. I want to be sure that it's correct and accurate. At the elementary school level, we've identified 3.1. At the middle school level, 5.6. And at high school, 7.0. These are just identified things. These aren't things we're doing. So I just want to make sure these are just all the things that have been talked about. And that's why they're not listed individually or anything else. We're going to move to the next slide real quick. Real quick. So here, these are the levers that are actively being considered. So the special education allotment, $1 million additional revenue, and then we have the central office reduction of 1.4 at a minimum, and then we have the consolidation of Fabian to Westside plus the low enrolled campus staffing, which is that 2.8. We've identified 1.9 at elementary and 700, a little over 700,000 at middle school. Again, being actively considered. With all of those in consideration, we still need to locate about $4.9 million in reductions. So we are, and that's what, yes, that's without a raise. Right, so this is what we're facing, this is what we're continuing to look at, and just kind of updating the board on our process. This is just a visual.
I have a question regarding that previous slide, or even the other one you talked about, identifying, say, middle school savings. The first thing that I thought about, because every time we get the daily attendance or enrollment numbers, I do see the imbalance in, say, middle schools. And if they were more balanced, like some students moved from one middle school to another, does the reduction, any reduction that is done, will that have less of an impact because of the students that are, how will I put it? Or even thinking about how middle school is or how elementary school is, where we're trying to have under the low enrollment staffing number, or I'm just thinking out loud here, because I'm wondering if there's some benefit to middle school by rebalancing those numbers across campuses.
So as part of our staffing guidelines review, we did look at middle school staffing guidelines just like we did elementary. And so we did add some additional staffing guidelines for middle school as well for those lower enrolled campuses. To answer your question about if we shifted kids around to make it more equitable, there could be small differences, just like at elementary where you saw it may change the number of assistant principals or the number of counselors or something like that. I can't say how significant that would be. And as we all know, the majority of our payroll on a campus is still teachers and IAs. And so those are assigned based on a certain number of students, and so regardless of where the students are, you're going to need those. And so just like the elementary low schools model, you're looking more at those non-classroom positions that would potentially be impacted if we were to try to do that.
So this is a kind of a graphic representation of where we are. And then next steps, on the 22nd, we will be bringing our 25-26 budget to actuals. So it'll be the first time that we've seen that. We have 6 months of actual data, and then we project out the remainder of this year. That's kind of a key thing. Seeing where we're going to end this year is important in everything that we're doing. Back to the same, it's the early forecast is still showing that we're about $12.8 million deficit right now. We do need the board assumptions approved on the 22nd, so we can have some more discussion about that in a second. We can bring back a multi-year budget or an updated budget, as we discussed earlier. If you're wanting to see some different models, we could bring back that on the 22nd so that you can have that information. And then again, TA decision, February, March is what we're looking at. And just knowing that administration is continuing, to identify reductions and to have outreach and communication and feedback with staff, community members, et cetera. So that's where we are now. We have more questions or
Board
things we want to
members?
go back to.
Nkosi?
One, thank you. This has been extremely helpful, and it's good to see all the levers, and can't wait to see them scored across the commitments. One thing I still see missing is going after students that live in our boundaries but are not attending our schools, listed as a revenue generator. And so still just want to call that out. Would love to see that as an initiative for marketing to students that live in our boundaries, are not currently going to our schools.
Board members, any other questions? Trish? Are you good, Trish? Well, thank y'all so much. Seriously, I love the way y'all had this presentation, and I loved how y'all gave us breaks and gave us some prompts so we weren't in every direction. So I really appreciate y'all giving us this presentation in the way you did. This was really appreciated, so thank you. All right, board, go ahead.
Do you mind if I just kind of
Yes, go for
recap,
it.
just
Go
so
for
we're
it.
clear? I just want to make sure. So I'm going to go back through every time we paused on one of these slides that you can't see what I'm pointing at, but it looks like this. So what I heard was move forward with a proposal or what it would take for DOI and bring that back to the board. And then I heard one board member request that we connect this to student outcomes. I think this is a good idea. I just want to make sure everybody's good that we're moving forward there. I know these aren't board decisions. I just think some clarity helps everybody. And then pay increases, definitely you want us to look at those. But I think what I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, is looking at pay increases, how it interacts with health insurance costs. But what I heard is, what is our recommendation and why? How do those things all interact? If we give a 1% raise, but we don't increase, or we do increase employee contributions, that's no raise potentially. So it's just showing that and then making our recommendation and explaining why is what I'm hearing you say that we want. I heard a request to look at some of the different, a more aggressive approach. So going with that lower enrollment and maybe even a couple of scenarios, we'll have to play around with what that might look like. What does that mean? And the way I envision that, and Nkosi, I'd love feedback on this, is the slide that had the amounts that had everything on the table, the one you kind of like, we're going by that one quick. I don't remember which one it was, but it might look like, okay, if we want to go that route, then that means we're going to have to pull these other things off of there to hit that increased mark. And so what's that hit, so to speak, to our district going to look like in terms of reductions? Does that sound correct? Okay. And then federal funds, a request to understand what all is included there as we're kind of planning. If all federal dollars went away, what positions would we lose? And then so then we have a good understanding of, if anything, would we move that to the general budget? Or what if there's a 20% decrease? How many positions are we talking, and what would that mean to the general budget for sure there as well? Circling back to health insurance and pay, because we kind of talked about that twice. I heard a request to include in our processes around satisfaction with the plan that we have right now. And then, and I think I already said this, how does everything impact how do those things impact one another in terms of health insurance pay increase? That ties to retaining staff as well, I guess. So then, I think I got it all. Did I leave anything out? Okay,
Well, I have a question,
sure.
and this would be for slide 37. It's really just clarification, first of all. 37. Yes. All right, yes, so for this one, for me, I think it would also be helpful to see what was done last year, because that's, like, for example, what did you say? Yeah, I'm just saying, to me, it'll be helpful to almost see, I know we have those numbers somewhere, but seeing them side by side. And that way, because I know that we've talked about how much secondary took a hit last year, and we're just trying to see how much more we're asking or identifying, and are we looking at a total of 12 million for high school over 2 years? I mean, like, what does that number look like? And when it comes to central office reductions, it doesn't say that it's identified. So is that not identified yet, or that's just the goal?
Well,
The 1.4 is identified, it may be more than, it's plus, we're vetting, and so they've promised and guaranteed 1.4, we're going, and right now I'm seeing more, but we need to vet all of that and make sure that there aren't errors or other needs that they're not thinking about, so we have lots of questions, and I don't want to bring a number that is inaccurate, so I'm sticking with the 1.4 until I can.
It's just because it wasn't qualified on the line that says identified, just like the other ones say identified. So
Well,
it's just
because that
kinda-
one's really just included. I mean, we're doing the 1.4. It's in the actively considered, like this sheet. It's identified. It's been identified. So I guess I could have put it in there.
All right, okay,
The 4 is just, it's identified, but we weren't necessarily considering all of it. To me, the 1.4 is committed. I mean, it's being done.
At
Okay,
minimum,
so
we're
committed.
going to
Yes.
do 1.4.
So it's beyond identified, it's committed. Maybe
Correct.
it's-
I guess I should have put, I can put committed.
Yeah, okay. And then, yeah, so I think for all of these categories, it's just helpful to see what was done the last fiscal year.
Everyone good? Are there any other questions? If not, y'all know who to get with, so please make sure you do that. All right, board members. I'm just gonna put us in a close. I'm not going to break. Is that okay? No, we can do that. All right, it is 8 p.m. Oh, my goodness. And the board will now go into closed session for the purposes permitted by Texas Government Codes 551.071, consultation with attorney regarding pending or contemplated litigation and/or attorney-client privilege matter. Texas Government Code 551.074, personnel deliberation regarding resignations, terminations, employment, reassignments, duties, and evaluation of personnel and public officers. Texas Government Code 551.0821, deliberation regarding matters whereby personal identifiable information regarding one or more students will be disclosed. No action will be taken in closed. Any action related to closed session agenda items will be taken during open session. It is 8:24 p.m. and the board is returning to open session, and having no further business, this meeting of the Leander ISD Board of Trustees is adjourned.